Is what you're gonna say important? Can I run and grab a beer real quick now that we're super sidetracked and like we're not talking anymore? This is the perfect time to get one. I'm sorry, but this is the perfect time to go get one right now.
Go get one. What are you still waiting for?
All right. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Books, Beer, and Banter. I'm Joe here with Lucas and Shane. Today we're going over part 2 of The Black Swan by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. This section was all about making predictions specifically and, why we're not too good at them. It was a shorter section, about 80 pages, but, getting into it. Guys, anything off rip that stood out to you or you want to bring up first?
He is so fucking arrogant.
Taleb, yeah.
Yeah. I like it,
well, he's not arrogant.
He's just cocky. Yeah, well, I guess they're the same thing.
He is definitely arrogant. I feel like there's no doubt about it.
There's a difference between, like, I don't know, maybe arrogant, or more like very confident and disagreeable, and also just like doesn't take bullshit from people. I feel like it's different when you call out people who are like bullshit artists and say like these people are fucking idiots versus being like I'm so smart. Like I guess in both ways.
He could talk the talk and walk the walk, kind of like it works out, I guess. But I couldn't agree more, Lucas. I'm like, you smug bastard as I'm reading this.
But it's what makes it so entertaining and so like easy, like enjoyable to read.
He just shits on fucking investment bankers, like just destroys people's lives. It's amazing.
Well, so there's a section here where he talked about how like a 2% error rate turned out to be close to 48%. So like there was this experiment where he asked people to predict something within a range and like say, hey, between what range can you predict this with 98% certainty? And essentially there's supposed to be like a 2% error rate, but in reality for everyone, even accounting for the massive, even saying like, oh, well, it's 1 to 10 million, there was still a 43% error rate. Like 43% of people didn't get within their range, didn't cover the actual stat. But it was just an interesting thing.
So people understand what you mean.
Yeah,
like how many people
people should be reading along, right? All right, so here I'm.
Are you calling out the audience?
Yeah,
so
yeah, dude. Fucking read the book. All right.
Why else are you here?
All right, here. This is the best example. I'm 98% confident that Catherine II of Russia had between 34 and 63 lovers. And then, so like you're saying, hey, how many lovers did Catherine II of Russia have? And you're supposed to guess. So you make a range and you're supposed to like say with 98% confidence. Well, anyway, the whole point of that idea is that there's this idea like that he calls, why can't I speak? Epistemic arrogance. Wow, that was bad. Epistemic arrogance bears a double effect. We overestimate what we know and underestimate uncertainty by compressing the range of possible uncertain states. So we like overestimate how much we know, like our confidence in things, and then we also underestimate how uncertain or how big the impact of things can be. And I feel like that like is the key to the whole like idea of a black swan and why they're so impactful, because we think we're so smart but that we can predict these things, but these things are so random to a degree that we just literally can't predict them. So it makes the spread of like what happens even worse. It's like not predicting 2008 and putting all your like buying a new house, putting your money in whatever, you know what I mean? And then like just being overconfident in how quote unquote good the economy is causes an even bigger blow up.
Yeah, it's like the perfect recipe for disaster. It's like when you lay it out in words, it's like being overconfident in how smart we are, and at the same time not really knowing or like underestimating the ranges of consequences. It's like when you read it out loud like that, it's like that's a formula for disaster. Absolutely, like no way around it. I thought there was a lot of cool. He brought up a lot of cool like experiments that were run that like really show how bad we were at like estimating like ranges and like repercussions and stuff. That Catherine example was one of them. He had the other one where it was like you have to do the same thing, like assume like guess like ranges with like really no prior knowledge, but they let it off. Like, it was like the anchoring kind of principle where they like, it's kind of like priming, like where you just like say, like, I think that it might be like a marketing term or not, but like they gave them like a high number for some like irrelevant range, I think. And then the people that heard the high number tended to guess like greater ranges. It just like, it just shows like how easily, but like subconsciously influenced we are in even making these decisions, you know?
And the other one was like, if you were to ask someone in conversation, like, oh, what's your social security number? Or what are the last 4 digits of your social? And then like later in the conversation, you're just like, oh, like if you had to guess, how many dentists would you say are in New York City? And very often their number would be based off of the last 4 digits of their social. Because it's like it's a 4-digit number, and you think like, okay, it's definitely in the thousands.
Yeah.
Your brain just connects the dots there, and like, I'd say like 9,000.
Dude, there was a section in here that was kind of like, I felt like super relevant to like kind of COVID times and like remote work and everything. But he said, I asked my friend the purpose of this contraption. This guy was wearing a headpiece and he was constantly talking to it. And this was, back before like AirPods and things like that. So, Nassim said he asked his friend what the purpose of the contraption this guy was wearing was. And the guy said he likes to keep in touch with London, I was told. And Nassim says, when you're employed, hence dependent on other people's judgment, looking busy can help you claim responsibility for the results in a random environment. The appearance of busyness reinforces the perception of causality of the link between results and one's role in them. This, of course, applies even more to the CEOs of large companies who need to trumpet a link between their quote-unquote presence and quote-unquote leadership. And it's just a really interesting thing of how, like, things can be completely random and, like, the success or failure of something can be random, but your increased presence, you can claim more responsibility. Like, I had an impact on it. Meanwhile, it could have been completely random.
Yeah. You know what my question is like, I don't know too much about like the inside workings of like investment bankers and even just normal bankers and, people that give loans and all that. But like, I feel like he makes really big generalizations about like, they're all luck. It's all luck, dude. They're all scumbags and it's all luck. And like, that's not the first time I've heard like that fucking notion before, but I'm like, to some degree, like, can we not give these guys credit at all? Or is it like, that might be just like his shtick. He's just like, oh yeah.
No, I think he's just talking about a certain
bankers,
class of people, like a certain class of them, but generalizing to like the total because it's most of them. Like he's talking like he's saying that like it unfortunately is most of them, but like, so he's generalizing and saying that though, like, I think the reason why he's such an asshole and like hearing him explain this is that like, basically he said this, like, if you see a fraud and you don't call a fraud, then you are a fraud. Like if you see someone who's a fraud and putting other people at risk for their financial gain and lying to people about it, and you don't call them out and tell people that they're a fucking bullshit vendor, then like you are a fraud. You know what I mean?
But what if they're not a bullshit vendor in like their mind? You know what I mean? Like if I see you as
still
a scumbag,
they're too dumb.
but like I'm just saying, like if I think you're a fraud, you know what I mean? But you're not, like what weight does that hold? Really?
No, but he's saying yes, but he's saying that no one can predict. Then why are people being hired to be predictors? Your job is a lie. If you were he said like, don't drive the school bus blind. That was his.
Yeah.
Like.
Well, dude, everybody knows. Like he shows the data.
Yeah.
That these people are just wrong in their predictions.
I understand how the way that you think, and like I feel like a lot of your beliefs, I can just like read them off these pages. Like he's definitely a libertarian, and I just can tell like a lot of these thoughts you bring up in like conversations and your political and like social stances. And in reading this, I'm just like, holy shit, this is where it came from. Maybe not where it came from.
No, honestly, it probably is. Like, I don't think that there's like a book that's these books just, or like any of them, just because there's so many, like, it's just completely different from how I looked at the world before, especially getting like being in finance classes and whatnot and like thinking about this stuff. Definitely like hijacked I need to like branch out to other very interesting and like thought-provoking people, so I don't have this one thought matrix of like Nassim Taleb running in the back of my head.
No, me too.
I just thought he was like, there's times he could come off as like, kind of an asshole.
Oh yeah,
I couldn't. Yeah,
for sure.
I
He's
yes.
definitely very disagreeable to the point of being an asshole.
Yeah, you could tell he
Like,
likes it though.
yeah,
You could tell he's like,
like
"Come
he
at
gets off
me."
on it. It's a
Yeah,
little bit
yeah.
of like adrenaline
Gets
every time
off.
he like. You hate that, but
I just
we're gonna keep using
I feel
it.
like since I've said, not that I hate it, it's just like a weird, it's just like a cringy word to me. And like, I feel like I hear it
Gets
so much
off.
more now that like I've spoken out into the world that I don't like it.
wait. What word?
Like the term like gets off, you know,
Okay.
it's like, oh, he gets off on that. I'm like, that's weird, dude. Like,
Yep.
it's just gross.
So going off the whole like lack of predictability and like biases, he brings up like a couple different examples. One of which is like Swedes believe that their driving skills put them in the top 50%, right? And it was
Yeah,
94% of people believe that. And then
yeah,
4% of Frenchmen believe that their lovemaking abilities put them in the top half of French lovers. But he was saying that like people go into marriage, into wedlock, believing that like, you know, we're gonna love each other forever. And
Oh,
in
yeah.
reality, half of the people get divorces, and not only that, but like people even less like you think, you know, less permanent than that, or less like, you know, oh my God, I'm making this lifelong decision, but like buying a house and you're like signing this thing for like a 30-year mortgage. And he was like, people like, we are still very nomadic. Like we're very nomadic, far more than we plan to be, and forcibly so. Like buying a house is just like not a good decision. Like you're not going to buy a house and live there forever. It is highly unlikely. But it's like everyone, you know, I think I'll get married, and like again, it's just buying into like the lack of predictability of the future. So
yeah.
it's interesting.
Well, it's just that, like you said, like everybody thinks that their relationship is like, maybe not everybody, but a lot of people would say that their relationship is in the top, you know,
Yeah, half.
90%
Yeah.
of, you know, top half of relationships.
Mhm.
When meanwhile, it's, you know, for a good
Mine
many
weren't.
people, it's probably not. Well, we found
I
that out.
bring that down by 3. So there you go.
Yeah,
I make
you
up for both of
you
you. I
accept
make
that
up
you're.
for both of you. So you can both say
Yeah.
yes, and I got both of you covered. Don't you worry.
Our boy,
Thanks.
our boy.
Yeah, that's,
Well,
that's
it just
what I'm here for.
it's just like one of those things where it's like in that scenario, like I know it's like you kind of like pick and choose, but it's like we're super emotional creatures, you know, like even if you go into it knowing like, all right, statistically, like, all right, like there's a 50-50 shot you get divorced like in your lifetime. I think just in people's minds, it's like, it's not going to be us, you know? It's just
Yeah.
like you could see it written on paper. I mean, I'm sure if you know enough people, you could see the statistic in real life, but it's just like one of those things that you just don't want to believe, you know? And like for a good point, like, because if you were like, oh, fuck, it might not go through, it's like, well, then the marriage rate's just going to drop off significantly. You know what I mean? It's just like
Or maybe you
net
just
new
find the
marriages
actual
aren't
person.
going to be fucking.
But don't you also? I think he talks about that with like tunneling. That you find points to back your own decision. So like that's his whole thing. Is like everyone will find those. Like again, this is not me saying like Joey, like you're doing you're buying into what he's saying. But it's like we make these decisions, and he also says it later. Like when he's talking about judgment, he basically says, "I do not believe in the track record of advice-giving philosophy in helping us deal with the problem, nor do I believe in that virtues can easily be taught." Why? Because we have to deal with humans as humans. We cannot teach people to withhold judgment. Judgments are embedded in the way we view objects. And I thought that the whole thing of like just judgment, like everything that we do, every way that we interact with each other, with people, with anything is judgment. And that has such like a negative word. But it just goes exactly to what you're saying, Joey's like, we have all these judgments of ourselves, of the people around us, of the decisions that we make. And it's like, all anchored, you know, again, going to his terms, to things that'll back our points and our beliefs. But it's, you know, it's all our own judgments. And then that whole thing goes into like, lack of predictability and like why black swans can happen, because like everyone makes their own judgments and that's impossible to like actually account for.
It was honestly, I never thought about it. Like, but he's like, you don't just look at a tree. He's like, you're either looking at like a beautiful tree and an ugly tree. And I was like,
yeah.
You're fucking right. And I was like, for the most part, I'm like, it's never just the object. It's like your opinion of the object or the thing that you're looking at. Like that's what it is. And I was like, wow. I was like, I wonder if I could like, even if I went outside now, and it's like, oh, I'm looking at like just the tree. You know, is that even me really looking at the tree? Or is that me just like being like, all you're thinking of is the tree? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, so it's like
it's judgment all the way down. It's just
like,
judgment all the way down.
No, it's Homo erectus. It's like, oh, tree. Oh,
Yeah, right. Like,
no.
Yeah.
is that it, dude? There was points where he brought up. Did you notice there was points he brought up that were the same points, and it was the Tolstoy fucking quote about like the happy family is a happy family, but an unhappy family always has its own reasons, or something like that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And there was a second part in there, I believe that he brought up, and I was like, isn't that weird? Like these super like you would never like think of like this book and that book sharing the same quote. You
What's
know?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it wasn't Sapiens. It was
Was
fucking Guns, Germs, and
Oh,
Steel.
it was? Oh, I don't
Tolstoy
know why I
quote.
thought it was Sapiens. Okay.
And I was just like, you would never. That's why it's even more weird, because that's like
Yeah,
more of
yeah.
like a factual book. Like at least like Sapiens was like a story. But I was just like, wow, that it's kind of wild that we, first of all, that they're even quoting the same person, but like secondly, like we just read those books like back to, or like are currently reading them back to back. I don't know. It was just like super.
Yeah.
I guess
That-
ironic to me that
I thought that was I thought that was funny, as well as the fact that he was like, I don't like to read history in like a purely objective standpoint. Like I like to read it more like story driven, like from people who, 100 years ago, and it's not, there's more like myths and tales and lore. And like,
Mhm.
I'm not using my study of history to like advance myself as a person. It's more of just to get an understanding of what happened back then and, for his own enjoyment. And I thought that was kind of interesting because I enjoyed Sapiens so much more than I enjoyed Guns, Germs, and Steel. And Sapiens was much more like story driven than Guns, Germs, and Steel was.
Yeah, absolutely. So I found the second reference point, and it actually is like a good like chunk of this about like discoveries. And I know we talked about a little bit last time about how like everything like that's something tinkering. It's like that's like a lot of like major discoveries are about. But he says, in other words, you find something you're not looking for, and it changes the world. While wondering after its discovery why it took so long to arrive at something so obvious. No journalist was present when the wheel was invented, but I'm ready to bet that people did not just embark on the project of inventing the wheel, the main engine of growth, and then complete it according to a timetable. Likewise with most inventions. And I was like, dude, they were using it as fucking toys, like wheels on a toy, before it was used as like an engine of growth, like you said. And I was just like, holy shit, like I know that too, because I just read this book back to back. But
that's how he ended the chapter. He was like, all great inventions started as toys. Like that was the last sentence of that chapter.
Yeah,
it was exactly
and happy accidents.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's what he said, is that people build toys and they turn, I think, there was a line, I think, where he said like people build toys and they turn into like billion-dollar businesses or something like that. I don't know if that's the exact line, but he said something about like people make essentially fun stuff. Like they just make stuff, and then it just randomly turns into like a big thing.
Yeah,
like
dude,
it's
you
not
said it. I know this because I was just in the last video, but you said it last episode. It's like Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, they didn't like embark on these things to like, I'm gonna make $1 billion. You know what I mean? They tinkered, they found they did something that they thought would be useful, like a fun project. Now like simplify it like that. But and then it just like happened to be one of those advances that changed the world.
Google was a research paper in like a PhD thesis, and they were like, "Oh, we can make, like, oh, we have a better way of making a search engine." They're like, "Well, why don't you fucking just actually do it?"
Yeah,
like,
right.
Sure. like, fine, we'll do it. We'll show you. And then now they're Google.
And now Google's Google.
One of my
also
favorite...
they had no way of. They also had no way of monetizing. Someone else invented a way like Google AdWords, and they bought it and then just put it into Google.
Yeah.
So like more just like tinkering, trying to come up with stuff that like.
Well, that was other people tinkering.
If someone else didn't come up with that, like maybe Google wouldn't have taken enough market share. Like maybe Google could have gotten acquired. I think Yahoo was looking to buy them for like $200 million or something, and they held out, and they wanted
no, you're
in
right.
one of the examples, they were like, no, we want at least 500 million, and then, or this was a different company, I think.
No,
then later on,
Yahoo passed on like 4 of the biggest acquisitions ever, like worst decision looking.
Really? Who?
Yeah, I forget. I saw a list once of like the
Yahoo was around before like Google.
Yahoo bought AIM, right?
No, AOL. Yahoo bought. I don't remember if Yahoo bought AOL. But they have just been terrible.
But anyway, going exactly to the point that you guys were saying, one of my favorite lines of this chapter, like with the tinkering thing, was trial and error means trying a lot. And I thought that was just such a good Like, it's so true. And that was his whole thing with going to that specific biotech, that all they did is they just kept inventing shit and trying different medications, and they would invent things and they weren't worried about what the actual end use was. They were worried about if it did anything at all. And then if it did anything, did it actually have a value in the market? And it was just tinkering to tinker and making things to make things and just inventing to invent versus like, you know.
Yeah, he said they were wearing Nassim Taleb shirts or something.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I thought was super interesting on the tinkering route is like when he was talking about like specifically the United States. And it goes back to like America being like the land of opportunity. And in my mind, I was like, it's the land of opportunity because it's like, it's the fruitful land. Like here you have you have the means to do what you want. You know what I mean? It's just like a freer economy. But I never really thought of it's the land of opportunity because culturally other places like failure is held on such, I don't want to say like a higher regard, but it's more of like, it's so much more a negative in other cultures. Talking about like, I think the Japanese and like how it's
like a shame.
Basically. Yeah, you can't tinker in failure because it's like almost like once you're a failure, you're like labeled a failure, you know. And I just thought that was like super interesting because I never really thought about it in that, you know, in that means. I just thought we were like, at least when we were called that for like back in the day, it's like because we had the most like fertile land, like so to speak. You know what I mean? Not because like culturally, like an ideology, it's like it's a better place to do this as well.
We learned that it wasn't the fertile land, you know, because we didn't have the access to the right
until
you try to make a reference to a different book or something like that. Is that what you're trying to...
It's funny though, that exact section, Joey, is literally, I wrote at the bottom, this is why the USA is what it is today economically, because that it's like in Europe and Asia that they said that's in Europe and Asia, that's where they perfect the technologies that are invented in America. Because there is that like willingness and tenacity to fail and keep trying. Just to circle back super quickly, Shane, not to cut you off.
Yeah, no,
they did buy Google in 1998 for like $7 billion. Then they didn't buy Google for $5 billion in 2002.
Wait, what was the first number? I'm sorry.
It was like sub $1 billion. It doesn't say exactly.
Oh, so I think they said 7 billion and then 5 later.
Sub $1 billion. Then they didn't buy Google again in 2002 for $5 billion. Then they were looking for, Facebook wanted $1 billion in 2000. It doesn't say. In 2006, and Yahoo said no. We'll offer 850 million. Zuckerberg said no. Now it's worth over 100 billion. They then rejected Microsoft buying them out for $44 billion. Today they're sitting at like 15 billion. So those are like the big ones.
Jesus Christ.
Fuck ups, like morons. Yeah. But again,
all right, I don't want to pull us back, but I want to pull us back to the beginning of the book. The beginning of the chapter, because we're kind of at the end. But I feel like there's a lot that we passed over. But there was just this one line where he talks about doctors and psychologists and things like that. And he says, talking about experts in general and how there is an expert problem, and how too much knowledge is not always better. It's sometimes, but not always better. And actually too much knowledge is usually toxic. But this one line where he said, no matter what anyone tells you, it is a good idea to question the error rate of an expert's procedure. Do not question his procedure, only his confidence. So when you think about like, if a doctor is going to tell you, hey, I have a problem with my back, and they're like, you know what, you need surgery on your back. Like you should question their confidence in the fact that they know exactly what's wrong with you and their ability to do it without further injuring you. But you shouldn't, if you choose to go through with it, you shouldn't be there and be like, oh, you shouldn't have cut that part first. Like you shouldn't question the actual like thing that they're doing, but their confidence and everything leading up. Like if a doctor's like, oh yeah, I don't think that you have cancer, even though you're really sick, like you should go to another doctor. And like, it is very smart to go and get a second opinion on what a doctor tells you is wrong or isn't wrong with you.
Didn't he say that specifically, that he was like on the wrong end of that?
Yeah, well, I think he like alluded to it or something.
That he was like, trust me, like I've been on the wrong end of a doctor saying like you don't have cancer or something like that. I don't know exactly what it was.
Yeah, he says if you walk into a doctor's office with a symptom, do not listen to his odds of it not being cancer. And that's like that asymmetry of like, if he detects that it's cancer, you can trust him. But if he says it's not, then you're like, you need I think this is where he talks about like having no evidence is not evidence of there being absence of the thing. Like if you don't have evidence, it doesn't mean that it's not there.
But still, and even in that medical example, like you, the person questioning that, it's, you know what I mean, like, get a second opinion if he says it's not cancer. You have to have some sort of ailment that you would think it could be cancerous. He's not saying like you have the flu, you go to the doctor, like make sure it's not cancer. He's saying like if it's something that might is in the realm of possible cancer, then like if you think it already is, then you should. And they say
if it's consequential, if it's like if you either have if you could potentially have cancer and that means you're gonna die. Like if you need back surgery or something, or you need like back surgery, he talks about it in here. I don't know if it's in this. I like he mentions it somewhere, but how like back surgery is like not actually helpful like a large majority of the time. Like it's much like it just doesn't really help. Like we're not very good at doing back surgery and helping people with their ailments in their back, like spinal surgery. And like it's usually something where you have to like assume the, you know, intentions or the incentives of the doctor. Like giving you some Advil and telling you to go to physical therapy is a lot less profitable than like cutting your spine open, you know? But I don't know.
Yeah. Well, you also have to assume the intentions of like the person too. You know what I mean? Like I feel like a bad back, and like granted people have bad backs, but like a large majority of like times I've heard people with like back issues and like stuff like that. It's like a lot of times it's like fraudulent to some degree, you know. It's like one of those things where I at least I think it's like super hard to be like, no, you don't have back issues. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying like your vertebrae's fucking snapped in half. You know what I mean? I'm just saying when people are like, oh, I got work, I got a back, and now I get, you know what I mean, like 60 fucking Percocets a month. You know what I mean? Or I can't work and I claim workman's comp. It's always, oh, I got a bad back. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like, that's like probably very low case, but I feel like, you know, if you're going to question the intentions of the doctor, you have to also question like the intentions of like the fucking person going in there. The patient at the same point.
If you're an honest person, you should go into a doctor's office and question. And like, if it's not like, if you don't get a positive test result, like, dude, like a perfect example, I went to like a med station on Long Island when right at like the height of COVID, and I could hardly breathe. Like I fucking was telling them that like I could only breathe, like it feels like I'm only breathing like 50% of the oxygen that's like coming into my body, and like I had flu symptoms. And this is like right at the start of like before COVID really took off.
Yeah, that's when we came back from Florida, bro.
Yeah.
And bro, we came back from a hotspot state. You have all these symptoms.
Yeah. Well, and I was and they literally like I go in there and like it wasn't even like they literally were so. She just like wanted to give me antibiotics and get me out the door. She said like, oh, well, we'll give you this. And I was like, oh, well, like, what's that for? And she's like, oh, well, for like a sinus infection, like strep. Didn't even give me like a strep test or anything, which is like, or a flu test. And then said like, and then I was like, wait, I haven't even finished telling you all my symptoms. Like I've got a laundry list of like, everything that could be wrong is wrong. And I didn't even tell you that like, I can't breathe. Like 50% of my air, like I can't even breathe. And she's like, oh, well then I'll just give you this other thing. I'm like, what the fuck is that for? I'm like, what is that even for? What do you think I have? Like, why are you prescribing me?
It's for leukemia. It's like, what?
I was like, oh, great. I shouldn't go to a doctor. But so didn't get any tests. And I was just like, whatever. And I went home and I just roughed it out for like a week. And was like wheezing for a week later. Yeah, exactly. But like, I didn't go after that. I didn't go to a different place to get better treatment. You know what I mean? Which was stupid. Like I should have went to a place that actually could have tested me. But like, in that moment too, like I thought I thought the woman was the expert. You know what I mean? And I was just trusting whatever she said, even though I was a little hesitant, like, what is this for? Like, I was still like, she must be right. You know what I mean? Like,
she's the doctor.
Yeah. I don't know. Just like my own experience with that.
Yeah. I feel like that was in particular a time where it's either like we didn't know what the fuck was going on, or like we didn't want to know what the fuck was going on. Not we as in us, but like we as in like, I feel like just like everybody. And they're like, yeah, nah, you don't got it. Like there's so many stories of like, I know so many people just like
My
you
mom.
where like, I have the coronavirus. I just need you to tell me. Like I have every symptom you've listed out. Like I have. And like, even the ones that are like, oh, you can't get tested unless you like have the flu-like symptoms and have a fever. People are like, bro, I have that. Like I've been in contact with people that have been tested that have it. And they're still like, nah, we don't think you got it. You know, it's like,
Yeah, you're like, what?
what the fuck is wrong with you people? Like, do we have one test per state or something like that?
Well, that
It's
was
like,
when I was trying to get, when I was thinking that I might have had it. It was like when I was looking, it was like the requirements to get tested were like you had to have been out of the country to like China or have been in contact with someone within like the last 2 weeks. And I was like, what? I was like, what? Like, how many people are in contact with people that like from, you know, on a plane from China within the last 2 weeks? Like, what about all the other, like, I don't know. It just was.
I don't even want to dive in the coronavirus thing because I have a lot to say there, but.
well, then say it, bro. If
No,
you're
I
just
just
say something like
like,
looming like that.
That wasn't.
Yeah, right.
This dude's all fucking talk, bro. Don't get me started. All right, let's get on to something else. Right?
It's like, don't get me started. It's a hoax. Don't get me started.
In your example, that was
You
just
don't want me to bust out this
specifically-
knowledge on your asses. Open up your third eye wide.
Let's just keep talking over Lucas so he gets even more mad.
I hope the dogs start barking too.
They happen. Back to the book. I have a point.
I have a point. I have a point.
So you know how I said
I have a point.
the fucking
I have a point.
Okay.
I fucking hate you guys.
Me?
No, Shane mostly.
I have a point.
Just let him go.
All right, go.
So the whole Michael Berry.
Wait, actually, I have a point right now.
The whole Michael Berry thing. I think what pissed me off most there is Shane's fucking shit Wi-Fi paused as he started laughing and just like he froze like that, and
you just want to punch him right in the fucking
face.
head. Dude.
Yeah. So we talked about predicting.
Yeah.
The next thing was forecasting. I thought that the issue or the name I brought up, Michael Berry, that I thought was Christian Bale in The Big Short. He actually plays someone named Michael Burry, Burry, not Berry. Michael Berry.
Maori, same thing,
exactly,
you know?
Yeah. I was close enough. Either way, they talk about like different models of a cue ball hitting a pool ball.
Oh.
And they fucking, this whole thing was absolutely fucking insane.
Mind-blowing.
The second that you start talking about more impacts. So he said, once you get to the point, the problem is that to correctly compute the 9th impact, you need to take into account the gravitational pull of someone standing next to the table, right? So that's just the 9th impact. So talking about 1 impact, it's just like the table and the ball. 2 impacts, table and the ball, whatever. 9th impact, you have to start taking into account the table or the person sitting next to the table because their gravitational pull. When you compute it to the 56th impact, every single elementary particle of the universe needs to be present in your assumptions. So first of all, that's fucking insane. But also it's just like this, the whole bigger point that he brings up is like, as you go deeper and deeper and you start taking into account different variables, predictions go so fucking out of whack. And his whole point, and like this is something that I'm assuming we'll get to, but the second you start bringing in like all these social, issues to economic models, it's gone. Like you have any sort of like fundamental basis that you are trying to build this study on, it just can't exist because of the amount of variables that exist in a social world.
Yeah.
Like we're not in mediocrity stand, we're in extremist stand.
Well,
like,
that's why they. Oh, keep going.
No, that was it.
No, I was saying that's why when he was saying that they to accurately forecast, they just slapped a label on like a rational. This is how a rational being would act. And when you're reading it, you're like, wait, like what is a rational being? Like a fucking robot that would do everything that you want the model to do? Like that, you're giving it it's like no, a rational being would take steps A, B, and C. Where it's like no, like. Only this very specific instance, like would that happen, and nevertheless, like all, like, to Lucas's point, all the other shit going on at that specific moment in time, all those variables. It's like you really can't. I feel like predicting like a human nature is like, or like a human's interaction. It's like that's you. How could you do that?
I mean, dude, even if you don't take the social factors into account, I think like part of the point he's making too is like that social factors are just infinitely complex. Like the first impact with a social being is your model is like your model's done. But the other idea that the further you go in time with anything, even as like, hey, I'm gonna fucking roll this ball down the hill, and like the further that you go and try and predict where it's gonna be, like the harder and harder it gets, and the more that you have to take into account. So basically he's saying like people are trying to model what the price of oil will be in a week, but the fact is that once you go past the next minute, you have no fucking clue what's going to happen. Like you literally have absolutely no clue, and everything gets just infinite. Like you would literally have to know the outcomes of every interaction with like every person in the world in order to know that there's going to be a certain price on oil. So the whole idea, the whole broader idea of this whole notion of forecasting is just so like this point here that you just brought up, like really brings it home that like, why do we do this?
Yeah.
Like, why does anybody think, why do we pretend that we can do this? Like, why?
Well, it's also just, so his exact quote was, to understand the future to the point of being able to predict it, you need to incorporate elements from the future itself, right? So then he gave different examples of that. Like when a new technology emerges, you either grossly underestimate it or severely overestimate its importance. Thomas Watson, the founder of IBM, once predicted that there would be no need for more than a handful of computers in the world. And then he said like something about the head of the US Patent Office in like the early 1900s stepped down because we were no longer going to invent anything new.
Yeah.
But it's of course it's impossible to predict the future because you'd have to know the future and you'd have to know the future technologies, which are also impossible to understand because they would exist today. It just becomes this like crazy, like philosophical, like if you knew this was going to happen, then you knew it. Like if you knew that you and your girlfriend were going to break up tomorrow, or he gave the example of if you knew your girlfriend was cheating on you, he was like, if you like predicted tomorrow that your girlfriend was cheating on you, that means you had all the empirical evidence today that she was cheating on you.
So one time we were in Virginia and we got all fucked up, and like I don't know where the conversation went, and like I think him and his girlfriend got into like some trivial little argument, and we were like, dude, like what the fuck did you do? And we were all fucked up, and he was like, if I knew, I'd know. And I was like, dude, we pissed ourselves for fucking ever, bro.
Lucas had a topic, and if we thought out
what was
there,
his topic?
I've got another one. The pool example and the unpredictability of the future.
Yeah. Wait, before we leave that really quick.
Oh, we could stay here all day.
What did you think he meant by impacts? Like every time the cue ball, because like in my mind, he was hitting it. It wasn't two balls. It was a full rack.
No, there's a visual.
No,
it's one ball hitting another ball.
No,
it is.
That's the visual for that?
Yeah.
No, it's not.
I'm pretty sure it is.
Yes, it is. Yeah,
I don't think so. Maybe. I feel like that was like pages after the cue ball conversation.
No, it's the same. It's him talking about it. Yeah, it's the same thing.
Holy shit, I was off on that.
So basically it's you hitting one ball into another. After it hits so many times, like you have to take into account like the spin. Yeah. Every wall hit. You have to take into account like the spin, because every time you hit the ball that you're like sending has like a little bit of a different spin. So even the first hit is kind of hard to exactly predict exactly where it's going to go. And then if you like the further you get, it's even harder and harder and harder to try and figure out where that ball is actually going to end up.
You know what's weird? When you think about it like that, it's like you wouldn't think it would be so hard to predict. Like you would think that if you have four walls, if you have a rectangle, and let's just say in this example for you, but if it's going to hit 56 times, like this is in the land of the hypotheticals, then it's going to be maintained. Like, are you if it's the same speed, which like it's not, but like if it was, like, is it that hard to predict? You know what I mean? Like maybe because it's losing speed,
clearly,
it is.
Yeah.
But it's like if you're just like like how specific are we talking? Like, can you land it on like a 6-inch in diameter
but I think
circle?
No. We're
think
like the
it's
exact spot.
factorials. It's like it also, I saw this like fucking gif on Reddit of when you have like a 1 pound object, like let's say there's no surface tension and you have a 1 pound object, you have a wall here, a 1 pound object here and a 1 pound object here, and this 1 pound object hits this and it hits that. It like, so first of all, the number always ends up being pi. So like you have a 1 pound object, it hits it once, it hits the wall, and then it hits this object and it goes away, and they don't have any more impacts. Then you have a 10 pounds, and then they hit each other 31 times. 100 pounds, they hit each other 314 times. 1,000, so on and so forth.
Like there's a wall on both sides. You're saying
those are the impacts.
Like a Newton's cradle type of thing.
Yeah, exactly. But it's that wouldn't be exponential, but it brings it up, to another decimal point or another.
Yeah, it's a multiplicative.
Yeah.
Multiplicative.
But this one, I'm pretty sure this is like this is factorials. Like,
exponentially, it's exponentially more complex with every interaction.
Every interaction, exactly, because there's more. The idea, at least from what I understood, is for each contact, there's more variables that have to be taken into account. And like,
also he talks about the branching, how like if you hit it once, there's 8 different directions it could go in, 8 micro directions, and then each of those micro directions have 8 micro directions, and then each 8 to the 8th micro directions that it could have gone all have 8 directions. You know what I mean? So it's 8 to the 8 to the 8, you know what I mean, all the way up.
Yep.
And that's because this is like a real life example. Like if this was in like, I don't know, like a vacuum, like could it be less complicated? Is it because of like friction and surface tension and all of this shit?
Exactly. No, I think that's the whole
so
point.
He's trying to take the simplest thing.
But no,
yeah.
But that's the whole point, is that pool has friction and surface tension and gravity and all these things into account, that even by like just the 8th contact, you have to start accounting for the gravity of the person.
And those are like the bare minimum of, I guess, interferences in like the day to day. Like we always like that's something that is always present. Like
those are
surface tension, gravity, like the effects of
it's
other.
Like those. That's the bare minimum of like inputs that have to be accounted.
Yeah. And then you take in other factors on top of that, like social factors, not even like physical.
If the pool ball had feelings. And decided where it wanted to go.
Imagine the moment it could decide.
It's like, I don't want to go.
The rational thing is to go straight into the hole, but it decided today it's going to take a detour and go all the way to the other side of the table.
That's a phenomenal point, though, about like that rational, about labeling humans as rational. Like, if we were all fucking cue balls, like, like that would make sense, and like making these models depending on that. But just like the cue ball can't make a fucking decision to do something other than like we can, and like other instances can.
I did like your point, Joey, on the whole like rational thing though, because like he did say all these economic models that we rely so much on are of the rational person, but that rational person doesn't have the thought of like, do I want an apple or do I want a pear? They just simply act as if like whatever makes sense. There is no such thing as preference in an economic model.
They saw a cute girl pick up an apple, and so now they're picking up an apple too. Like that's not rational. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah, prime example, dude. I fucking this isn't a prime example. I completely take this back. But
example,
I hit the Juul, but the other day, and like I've heard of these before. But I seen this dude, this streamer, fucking hit like a Go Puff bar. I was like, that looks good, and I was like, so I went to the store today to buy more pods. Which, like, I guess rational Joe, if like it went to like the individual level, would buy, but it didn't take into account for that. I seen the stream, and I bought a Go Puff bar. These external influences that aren't accounted for. Like I said, not prime example, but
but I think that's a good example. It is, because it's social, and that decision alone fucked some sort of chart or some sort of like program that whatever company holds Juul built, that they're like, no matter what in our economic model, like Joe will always go to. Yeah,
Joe's bought 1,000 packs, so he is gonna always buy Juul.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, they have it. Well, they also.
Yeah. The rooster doesn't exist here. That 1,001st pack will be bought, but little do they know.
And the thing that they try to predict is churn. And they're like, hey, well, we averagely churn like 15% of users. They quit or they die of lung cancer or whatever. But they also they don't take into account.
Sorry. Did you
All
say
right.
something?
So they no, but all right. So what I think like really comes relevant to this is that they don't expect that all of these popular streamers are going to start smoking puff bars and not Juuls, and all of a sudden puff bars are going to be cool and Juuls aren't going to be anymore. And now like their whole model of like, oh well, we have this many customers every day and this much churn. It's like, oh well, tomorrow now you're a fad and the other people are cool.
Yeah.
And like
They don't count for somebody
now
with
that
10,000 fucking viewers hitting something that's going to make, you know what I mean? Like, they don't account for that in their advertising model. It's also super fucked up how, because Juul was the biggest, like, they got the brunt of, like, legislature. So, like, now all you can have for Juuls is menthol, which, like, low-key, I'm convinced they, like, there was mint and there was menthol, and menthol tastes like a Newport, and mint tasted like a mint. And, like, menthol tastes like minty menthol. I'm convinced they were like, yo, we're just gonna like mix it up.
The FDA is gonna check.
So we could take the mint users and the menthol users, because like I hated menthol. Maybe I'm just like addicted to it. I'm like, this tastes like mint. I love it. But like, bro, this is, what is this called? This is Lush Ice. They sell like watermelon, pineapple shit. It's just because like there's small, no-named fucking like brands that like, well, this is like a pretty popular one, but it's not like the $6 billion Juul.
Well, the hammer hasn't come down yet, you know?
Well,
like,
no, it has on Juul.
No, but I'm just saying, like, they found their little loophole that they're gonna fucking profit as much as they can, and then it'll come down.
Absolutely.
But again, you would think that so here you go. Juul would account for if a competitor comes into the marketplace, there will be legislature that will affect them as much as it affects us. But we're not in, a logical world.
Yeah.
What is it? GoPuff?
GoPuff. If anything, it's
GoPuff is that other thing.
What the
GoPuff is that delivery.
It's a puff bar. Yeah,
but like puff bar didn't, they slid under the radar, and Juul is still getting hammered down in these states, and that wasn't a part of their economic model or their growth model. That to understand, like, oh, our competitors aren't going to have the same, hammer coming down on them in legislation.
Yeah.
Also,
to the same degree, though, to exactly your point, it's like what was a black swan for Juul could be like a negative black swan for Juul could be like a positive black swan for Puff Bar, because they were like a no-name, like shitty fucking, not shitty, but like a no-name company. And how would they ever know that these regulations would come in and only cripple fucking Juul? You know what I mean? If I was Puff Bar, like, this is the greatest news on fucking earth, that Juul can only sell menthol and fucking tobacco, and we could sell Fruity Pebbles. I
feel like the way that it turns into, and like, I think you're totally right. And just like to connect all the dots, I feel like the way that it is a black swan is somehow, Juul, their, legislation came down, they could only sell menthol. Nate Schott's friend was a big Juul smoker. Nate Schott didn't smoke nicotine. This guy then wasn't able to get his normal, like, fruity Juul pack, so he was like, oh, what's this random thing I found at my shitty deli? Starts smoking it. Nate Schott's like, oh, what is that? It smells good. Can I try it? Nate Schott gets hooked. Nate Schott smokes it on stream. Other streamers hear him talking about it. All of a sudden, you have 1 million people listening to people smoking these puff bars.
Yeah.
And that's the Black Swan event. That, like, there's no model that could ever predict it. But if you were, it was
that initial purchase.
If Taleb was like, oh, I see this market being, a good market to invest in because 16-year-olds are getting addicted to nicotine. All right, fucking Juul is overvalued and I don't think I can make my return. Let me invest in Puff Bar. Like, that would be, I think that's where we can see a big return. And all of a sudden you have this 10,000 times return on this random company that just happened to take over the market.
Yeah.
So that's the Black Swan event, is exactly like that chain of events.
Dude, so well, first of all, this guy Phil Tetlock, who he references his research here in like this talking about the expert problem or whatever. It's funny because on Twitter he calls him Phil the Rat Tetlock. He calls him Phil the Rat Tetlock, and he's like, Phil the Rat said this, which was like some stupid forecasting thing or whatever, but he references his research here, which is like such an interesting thing. But so he talks about this like issue where Phil Tetlock did this study where economists represented about a quarter of his sample, but basically he judged the likelihood of like a specific event occurring. And he said that his study exposed an expert problem. There was no difference in results whether one had a PhD or an undergraduate degree. Well-published professors had no advantage over journalists. The only regularity Tetlock found was the negative effect of reputation on prediction. Those who had a big reputation were worse predictors than those who had none. But the points that he brings up about like this expert problem and how people like will make these predictions and use these models and be like, oh, we're so smart. Like, look at these models we came up with. We're so smart. And then when they go wrong, there's a few classes of excuses that he brings up that I think are just really relevant to keep in mind, like when you're like committing them. And one of them was like, you tell yourself that you were playing a different game. And so it's like, oh,
event, like the hurricane.
Yeah.
Like
had I known that a hurricane was coming, I would have changed my model. And it's like, yeah, well, no shit. Like, obviously you would have. That's the whole point of why your model sucks, because you couldn't take the hurricane into account. It's like, obviously you can't. But then if there's a couple, I'll just list them off. So it's like you invoke the outlier. There's the quote unquote almost right defense. And then there's one more where he talks about the hedgehog and the fox. But yeah, I think that the like almost right, the invoke the outlier, and the you tell yourself you were playing a different game are just like such a common like class of excuses that I don't know, it's just like good to be aware of when you're committing these sorts of like excuses. You know what I mean? Like,
God,
if only I had known that this job was gonna suck, I wouldn't have taken it. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
well, like,
It's like you could have known.
But
I mean, you just choose not to know.
They are absolutely all excuses.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like a big thing that I've taken away from this, at least, is like being aware of when you're making an excuse. Because I feel like he uses that a lot in the book of, people making excuses for predicting or for, it's prediction and for forecasting and like for errors that exist in data because they just rely on data. My biggest takeaway, a lot of this is like, oh shit, big picture thinking. But for me, it's more of like variability and admitting that I'm wrong and just not being forward with an excuse. Like, okay, I was wrong. And like, let me reassess the situation. And like, that goes exactly to what you're saying, Shane, is when someone's when it's like reputability is tied to their success of prediction. And it's because they don't have the leisure of just being like, oh, I was wrong. Because by saying, oh, I was wrong, in sense, like their reputability and like your trust in them would drop. So because of that, they have to remain like, headstrong and like put on a face and be like, no, like, it's okay. Like, I'm going to keep making these predictions and I'm right, 93% of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like it's even beyond like admitting it's like I was wrong. It's like almost like before that point, it's like before making that judgment call that would have led to be wrong. You know what I mean? It's like changing. It's like, oh, like you have to admit that you were wrong to probably come to this realization that like you don't know shit. But it's like if you can't come to that realization, then how could you ever change your mindset to like anticipate things like that? Instead of if it's always like, even if they could admit internally, oh, like I was wrong, but like whatever, like X, Y, and Z, it's like you're not really admitting you're wrong, but like you're still bound to make the same mistakes unless you're like, I shouldn't have been wrong in the first place. I should have seen this coming, or like we should have prepared differently, or anything like that. It's like I think it's a step even before that. That at least needs to change.
He talks about exactly that, and it's called like belief perseverance, the tendency to not reverse opinion or to reverse opinions that you already have. And he says, remember that we treat ideas like possessions. It's hard to part ways with them.
Yeah.
I thought that was so fucking like profound. It's like shit. Like, yeah, like my opinion, like I carry that, that is my opinion. But a lot of the times it's like, sometimes you have to part ways with something that you think is a part of you and that you own because you're wrong. But like our brains, it's exactly what you're saying is like, take a step before that judgment, before that thought, before that, and just like understand that this is a possession and it's not necessarily right. And like, just readjust and reassess.
Well, we also search for those opinions, like subconsciously we like feel the need. And I think now more than ever in like this, like very social environment, like with social media, it's like we need to have an opinion on everything. And like you're expected to have an opinion. If you're like, I don't have an opinion on that, people are like, oh, what, do you not care? Are you lazy? Yeah. It's like, well, I'm not an expert. You know what I mean? Like, I don't fucking know what's going to happen. Like, I don't think, like, I'm not going to tell you who's going to, win an election or something like that. Like I have no clue. You know what I mean? Like and I think that's where it's valuable too, is to recognize when you're trying to predict something, or like when you're making assumptions based on like frivolous data. You're like, oh, well, I saw X, Y, and Z, so I think like, okay, this is going to happen. But like, and then recognizing like, oh, wait, I'm just making like silly assumptions here that like most likely won't pan out.
Dude, I feel like that's most prevalent to me in like voting. And like, there's two parts to this. One part me being lazy, one part me being misinformed. And like, as to like why, like last election, like I didn't vote for like the president. You know what I mean? Like, the easy excuse is to be like, listen, I don't know enough about. I'm not gonna just like vote for the leader of our country without knowing anything. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just not gonna make like that judgment call, being like, oh, like on like the very slim like hearsay I hear about like either candidate. And like the other part is obviously me being lazy, because like if I cared enough, I would do my research.
That's where people would say.
But I'm like,
do the work.
People are like, oh, like you should vote. I'm like, yo, you want me to vote for your party? I mean, like you don't care that I like elicit my fucking right to vote. Like you're upset because like you think my vote's a vote for your candidate, which is like the funniest part. But to me, I'm just like, dude, like if I don't know enough, like why am I gonna make a decision? Like what if, and this will never happen, like, what if I am the swing vote for the country? I know it can't happen that way, but like, let's just say it did. Like, let's just say it was like a fucking ballot of every fucking person, and like I was the one that decided the fucking leader of our country. I'm like, would I want that? I would want my decision to be an educated?
I think that this also brings up another point though, of like, even if you do your research and you make your best decision, like you think like this is the right decision, you can't predict with any certainty what talking points and what things are actually going to be implemented.
Yeah.
Like 90% of the things that presidential candidates say they're going to do don't get done. Like it's just, I don't know if that's statistically like accurate, but it's a very large percentage. So even if they say everything that they're saying you agree with, you can't really like, and look, I'm not saying that this is a reason to like not go and vote or whatever, you know what I mean? Like I think you should, but it's like, it's interesting to think about how like you can't really predict the actual outcome. If your outcome, the one that you're looking for, is going to be the one to come, because social issues are also messy too. It's like, hey, well, I think that this policy will solve the problem, and other people I think this policy will solve the problem. And it's like, things are so complicated. You have to try it to know. Nobody knows if nobody knows if X is going to work or if it's going to, tank the economy. Like you have the two sides of the arguments there. Like,
and you don't know if, you vote for somebody who you think's going to like take, like, I don't know, like the country, the economy in like a certain direction. And then something like the coronavirus happens where it's like, you didn't factor in their capacity to handle a situation like that. And now this comes in, and now the person that you got elected into the office is like the wrong person to handle the job that came up, that wasn't anticipated.
I don't know why, just the fucking way you said that first part of when people say go vote, like that is always such a backed statement, and I'd never thought of it like that.
Oh, dude.
When it's like voting season in New York, and like everyone, and like I'm a super liberal person, socially, whatever, it doesn't matter. But every time, like all the people I follow on social media and whatever, it's like they always post a picture of like I voted sticker, and it's like go vote. And like I never like put it together, but you're so fucking right that when people are like super backing of like go like take advantage of this right to vote, it's never to like do it to take advantage of this right.
Yeah, have pride in your constitution.
Yeah, no, it's do it
party
to actually
elected.
back.
Yeah,
because I know that like if I'm posting this, for the most part, you're gonna share this opinion with me. And therefore, it's going to bring our voice together. But like, that just, I was sitting here like smiling, like with a shit-eating grin, like laughing. Because I was like, oh shit, like there is such a personal agenda when someone says go vote. It's just wild. Like the fact that had never occurred to me.
It's like, all right, like somebody says go vote and they're a hardcore Republican. You're like, all right, I'm going to vote for the Democratic Party. You still want me to go vote? You think they're going to say yeah?
Exactly.
Dude,
yeah, go exercise your right. Dude, go vote for the fucking, like, I'm sure some people will, but for the most part, there's always a fucking agenda for everything, dude.
I think
nobody does nothing for nothing, man.
Well, that's
dude,
the whole judgment thing. Everything is judgment backed. And like,
Yeah.
That's why like being judged. The term like judgmental is so like it has such a negative connotation, but like every decision that we ever make as humans is judgment. It's judgment based. That's how we decide, like how we live. Shane has a point.
Yeah, I think that, all right, so what I wanted to say is that this just brought up an idea for another like set of books that we could read at some point, which is like there's this book that I've been putting off reading for since I like heard about it called The Elephant in the Brain. But I think it's like the idea talking about these like hidden motives or like subconscious biases and things like that, and how like our brain kind of like just talking about the whole idea of how everybody has like a motive behind what they're saying, and maybe they say like go vote, but really they mean go vote for my party, and how we all have these like hidden motives and subconscious biases and
Then
things like that.
The second book then
Robin
in
Hanson.
that series would have to be Thinking Fast and Slow, because like I feel like that also just ties into like the heuristics and like the whole that he kept Joey. Thinking Fast and Slow is the guy Danny Kahneman that he referenced like a handful of times. Like his whole thing is like how we have these inherent biases based on like, tinkering and tunneling and just like little.
Yeah, you read that in college, I remember.
I know, it was the fucking,
Yeah.
I
You
read
bitched and moaned about it.
Yeah.
So it was the slowest book you could fucking get through. I don't want to read that book.
So this book,
Fuck you.
dude.
You
So
complain
here,
till no end about that shit. Get
all
the
right,
fuck out
hold
of
on.
here.
So the subtitle of this book that I was talking about is called "The Hidden Motives in Everyday Life." So literally this exact topic.
I'm gonna be a
of just,
skeptic and a half after reading Taleb. And
Oh yeah,
bro, I'm not gonna trust anything.
dude. I think getting into the psych stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, all right. I think that we've kind of burned ourselves out on topics here.
there is just one last point because like
Just let it go. You already said you miss a lot of points anyways. Just fuck it. Just chalk it up to one you could have brought up.
Bring it up. Lucas is gonna be thinking of this.
I know. I don't want your sympathy. I was kidding, bro. Just tell your point.
It's just like the whole thing of like what Taleb's like investment strategy and everything is like. After all he says about, the inability to predict and the inability to forecast, when people talk to him about like, all right, then like if you're shitting on us for making a prediction, what's your prediction? And he's like, I don't fucking have one. Like this is like the whole point is to invest in the like his whole barbell strategy of like 85% like super stupidly safe, 15% super risky. But I just thought the whole thing of like it is a totally valid response to like be like, all right, you look like you're an idiot for predicting this. And then they come back and be like, all right, so like, what are your top 10 predictions? Or like, what's your prediction on this thing? And he's like, I don't have one. Like, the whole point is you don't fucking know. So like, it's just really funny because like, no one can be equipped to argue with his argument because he's saying like, you're making the statement and you don't know. And they're like, all right, so then what's your argument? And he's like, oh, I don't know either. But I know
Yeah.
But like,
I just admit that I don't know.
Like,
but don't you feel like he has to have a smidge of a prediction? Like, or else point. You would be like, yeah, that 10 to 15% you're putting in, like you're putting it into something that you might acknowledge, you might not know what would happen, but you're not just blindly putting
No, he's doing educated guesses. I think it's like the idea. Like, hey, I'm taking educated guesses that I think, or also looking at all these predictors and being like, hey, all these people are still using these fucking financial models that make absolutely no sense. And so like in 2008, like when everybody's still using these models and like, the subprime mortgage crisis, and he's like, this is going to blow up. Like, this isn't going to go well. You're all predicting this great success. And like, everything's going to go to shit. And so he's like, I'm watching people be dumb with predicting. And like, I know they can't predict things. So I'm just going to bet against their predictions, and like, I'm just going to make money because I know that this is going to blow up eventually.
Yeah. I mean,
that was a prediction, knowing it would blow up eventually.
And he also gave the examples of how, like, what's a good black swan versus a bad black swan, right? Like, in the terms of, like, what is one that positively impacts people versus one that's negative.
I think what Joey, just to your point that you mentioned, I think what he would say is, like, he's not saying when it will happen. He's just saying using these models, like, there will be something that happens, like, that blows up this model. Like it just can't go on forever. Like most likely, like there's a high likelihood that something at some point is going to happen. You know what I mean? And like that thing was only 5 years away.
I also don't think that it has to be like, a momentous thing of like, the 2008 crash. It's also just making these speculative bets on, oh, I think this industry, like COVID, right? So they made a shit ton of money just because they're like, you know, the 15% that is not safe and super speculative was like against the market as COVID was happening and the market like tanked. But it's also making speculative bets that like as the market hits the bottom, they start saying like, oh, like I think that these things will recover well. And like, you know, it's not just like this has to happen in a bad way for my speculative bet to make money, but it happens in like a positive light too. And it's like, oh, like I think Spotify is going to be the next big thing. So like, how can I make a bet that like he says super leveraged. So it's like trading options or futures or like, you know, things that are like really reactive to the price of a, you know, stock, commodity, currency. But it doesn't.
So you think this dude takes out like little fucking options contracts on like shorting Tesla?
Yeah, but not little. Like the thing is his assets under management are probably like.
Well, like I'm saying, like little compared to his portfolio.
Yeah, 100%.
These are the hedges he's
0.01%, right? So
Yeah,
0.01%, but that 0.01% in a good day, like in if his prediction is right, can turn to 1.5% of his portfolio.
Yeah.
Like it's like we're talking like.
Yeah, and he says that he has other people.
Yeah.
Yeah, he has like other wealthy people who believe that like his bets, his hedge, because he's not like, look, I'm not going to make you a 10% return. He's like, look, if something crazy happens, we'll make a big return. So it's a hedge. It's more like a way to, like, I would say it's not exactly like, it's not purely a hedge because like he's planning on making money eventually. But a lot of people will say, all right, take 3% of my wealth and you're going to lose a little bit of money every day. But like when shit hits the fan, no. I'm not going to lose everything.
They still see a positive return year over year.
No, of course they see a positive. Well, it depends on the year, but it's like it depends on like what they do. The whole idea is that they lose money in some, like they're buying options contracts that expire. You know, like the contracts expire and they lose money on purchasing them, but eventually they make 27x returns.
Also, the name of his firm is Empirica Capita, which I think is funny. Like going with the whole empiricism thing that he just.
Yeah.
Doesn't he shit on empiricism? Isn't that like that's one thing I can't get a grasp.
No, he shits on naive.
Empirical
naive
evidence is evidence that was built on the past, right? Like past.
Well, he shits on naive. I think what he said, like in the last chapter, I don't remember what it actually is, but he called it naive empiricism, where like you make these, like you pretend that your models are better than like they actually are. Like there's no bad thing about math. Like math is, you can, if you try and like actually understand that black swans exist, you can use math to try and like have better approaches that like can model risk and like how you should approach the world. But like thinking that you're so smart and that you can just like build this model that's perfect is like the naive side of it that I think most people engage in.
Anyway, no big deal. Let's wrap this shit up.
If you haven't already, follow us on our Twitter, Books, Beer, Banter. Next week, we will be reading part 3 of The Black Swan, those gray swans of Extremistan. I have no fucking idea what it means, but join us next week, next Wednesday. We'll see you there.